Hello and welcome to episode 364 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. I'm your host, Pilar, and you can find out everything about what I do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Now, this is an introduction I'm recording after I've edited the episode because I forgot to say right at the beginning that this episode, which has the lovely guest, Catherine Nicholson, with me, is a newsletter episode. So we talk about one of Catherine's current topics of interest, and then we move on to give you recommendations for articles, books, and podcast episodes that we would like to recommend to you. Now, this has come from the monthly newsletter that I used to do on my own, but now I do with a guest, and we do this audio version. So if you want to get the newsletter in your inbox once a month, or sometimes once every 2 months, head over to virtualnotdistant.com/newsletter, and you can subscribe there. And a couple of things as well. This show was recorded on the 7th of August, 2024. And near the beginning of the episode, even though we don't go into great detail around it, Catherine talks about VR. And just a reminder that when we say VR, we're looking at virtual reality, just in case you're driving and you're like, oh, what did they say? What are they talking about? So there's just that thing. But now let's get on with the show. My name is Pilar and I am super delighted. That's not a word I use often, but I'm really happy to welcome back Catherine Nicholson. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Pilar. I'm so excited to be back. Thank you for having me.
Well, you've been on the show a couple of times, and listeners or people indeed who follow you online might remember that you are, of course, the co-founder and creative director of Virtual Training Team. So just remind us, what do you do there? Maybe it's changed since we last spoke. I don't know. What do you do at Virtual Training Team, you personally and the company?
Well, it's interesting because we started out 8 years ago as the virtual training team, really focusing on that. And so when the pandemic came along, it wasn't a pivot for us. Like we were already there. But what's really interesting now, Pilar, is post-pandemic, of course, every training company is a virtual training company. Yes. So we're always having to really think on our feet about what's next. How do we stay ahead? What are the next trends? What's going on with tech? And that's something that I guess is part of my role and part of my personality, in that I just can't help myself, snuffling around to see what's next, what's interesting, what's happening in the world of L&D and beyond. So I head up the whole sort of design and creative side of our business, really.
Yeah. And I have to say, and it's not what we're going to be focusing on today, but you do love tech and you enthuse a lot about new technologies. And I love that you experiment so much and show us a lot. Is there anything that you're particularly excited at the moment around technology? And we'll move on to the main topic in a second.
Yeah, well, I'm always excited about VR. It's something that we've been playing around with here for a couple of years. Everyone at VTT has a headset. So we have meetings in VR every week. I work on my own sometimes in VR and co-working, and then we do fun activities. So it was somebody's birthday recently, so we went and did like a circus in VR, and then another time we did a water park. So it's just exciting to see how the tech's evolving. But my view is you've got to be in it and play with it before the world is ready for it, so that when the world is ready, you're there and you've been there and you've done it and you've got something to say about it.
You said you go into VR yourself on your own sometimes. Do you pop into co-working spaces or what do you?
Yeah, I go into Horizon workrooms for a regular co-working group. Wow. We've got people from all around the world that are there. We have a quiet table for those people that just want to get their heads down and work, and a slightly noisy table for those that want to chat, or even just on your own. There's some amazing VR applications, which means you can have 5 screens around you as big as you like cinema screens. So you can really immerse yourself in that working environment. I know people that work 40, 45 hours a week in VR. It's where their office is.
Okay, we need to do another episode at some point about this because this is a whole different world. So, right, listeners, I hope you forgive me to come back to the topic we'd planned before I go off on one. This is so interesting. But the reason, well, to be completely honest, I was just curious about what you were up to, and we haven't caught up in a while. So that was my main reason for bringing you into the show. But also, I've been seeing that you have put out a lot of content, reflections, videos, all kinds of things, calls out for research that you're doing around, I'm going to go very broad around the topic of multi-generational teams and other kind of differences in generations. So where has this come from?
It's something that's been slowly building over the last couple of years, a year in particular, and then it just seems to have exploded for everyone. Maybe it's just part of my echo chamber that I'm seeing it everywhere, but it just seems like it is a hot topic right now. But I would say about a year or so ago, we were looking at our standard offerings as a training company, and we do lots of programs. So we have like manager programs, talent programs, grad programs. And one thing that we noticed is that the structure of those programs was pretty much the same, whether you were a seasoned manager or in the first few weeks of your career. The topics would be different. Like with early careers, you're more likely to be focusing on things like being proactive and being assertive and managing upwards and self-awareness and building brand. But the structure was the same, the virtual workshops with some pre-work and some learning nudges. And I just started to challenge that thinking around why would it be the same? Because these are different people who arguably learn in different ways, have different relationships with technology. So maybe we need to just start looking at the way that we deliver training for these different generations. So that, me being curious, that set me off and started to do some research. And I found that there was a lot of stereotypes out there around what we were calling then the early careers, but it's Generation Z, effectively. But I know plenty of Generation Z people, we've got one in our team, who just didn't fit that stereotype. And I thought it would be really dangerous for us to say, okay, everyone's saying that Gen Z is the TikTok generation. We need to start communicating in short videos. But maybe that isn't right for everybody. So we decided to embark on our own research. It's not complete yet. I hoped I'd have some crunched numbers to share with you, Pilar, but as soon as we have some, I'll share them with you. But effectively, we went straight to Gen Zers in the workplace to say, what do you think? What do you personally want? And we've also talked to some of their managers as well, because anecdotally, what we're hearing is Gen Zers might say, I'm really confident and assertive at communicating. But their managers are saying, yeah, but you're not communicating in a way that's particularly helpful
right.
for me or for the rest of the team. So we're just trying to really understand what's actually going on with this generation, and then trying to bust through some of those stereotypes to just find out what's really going on, and then how we can serve them in the way that we do learning and development, but also to share that with everybody else as well, so we can all get it right.
That's a lot. So remind me again, Generation Z is when were they born, more or less?
The eldest Gen Z are 27 now, so they're well in the workplace.
I find it funny because, to be completely honest with you and listeners, I just don't mix anymore with young people. There used to be a time when I was teaching, especially when I was teaching sixth form, and every now and then I caught myself saying, oh, I'm twice your age. So I was quite, not that I was in touch with them, but at least I was having some contact with them. And now I realize I'm not in touch with people from younger generations. Therefore, I haven't got a clue even of what the stereotype is, what their attitudes are supposed to be. So can you very broadly, and I mean, the whole point of your research is not to stereotype, but what are some of the things that a Gen Xer like me should know about the Generation Z broadly, who is emerging in the workplace?
I love how you're being careful about the stereotypes, because
yes.
I feel really uncomfortable with stereotypes, but it's often a stereotype comes from somewhere, and there's stereotypes and there's trends. So I found that really quite helpful. So for example, with millennials, a stereotype is that they love avocado on toast.
Okay, maybe I'm a millennial.
But I'm not a millennial, and I love avocado on toast. And I'm sure there are plenty of millennials that hate avocados. But the trend might tell us that statistically, if you're born within those years, you're more likely to eat avocado on toast. But going back to Gen Zers, a useful thing to be aware of is just think about a Gen Zer as being born with a smartphone in their hand. So they've been born around that technology. It's been there. It wasn't introduced to them. So I remember when I was introduced to the internet, for example. I remember the day, and I remember saying, "It'll never catch on. I don't get it." But this is a generation that just are so in tune with the digital world that shapes the way that they communicate. It shapes the way that they see the world, what they know about the world, what their horizons are about the world, their opinions around the world. But some of the stereotypes that have come out of that are things like they're entitled. I want to come back to that word in a second, actually. Entitled, they're lazy, they're opinionated, they're not committed, they're not engaged. And actually, if you look at the trends of what's really going on in this population, they're passionate about the world. They're passionate about working for organisations that are making a difference. They'll walk away from an organisation that doesn't deliver on what's really important to them. I read a stat just last week that 75% of this generation would walk away from a job, even if they had nothing to go to, just because that job didn't meet their expectations about their principles and what's important to them. They're incredibly creative. Of course, every generation has a different perspective of the world because our formative years were different.
Yeah.
But also they've got such a fresh approach and a whole set of ideas about how we work. When I was growing up in my early career years, I was really looking at my role models and thinking that's how I need to be. Whereas this generation is saying, you've got it wrong. You're all the people. You think that the right thing to do and the way of proving your self-worth is by working stupid hours and that, lunch is for wimps. So they've got a lot that we can learn from. But that word entitled, I said I wanted to come back to. Every generation thinks that the generation that follows is entitled. Even back to Socrates, there's quotes from Socrates like dissing the next generation. And we all sort of complain about the generation that gave birth to us as well. So it's been going on for centuries.
I like that. Distro, I was thinking of that. Tim Burgess and I did an episode in Management Cafe about different generations in the workplace. And one of our conclusions at the end was, like you're saying, we all view the generations in this different way. But I think it's very interesting what you're saying about the challenging of how work should be done, that maybe that hasn't come as strongly before from a generation point of view. So do people, because I haven't worked in a corporation, for forever, do you find that people mix? How do people mix of different generations in the workplace?
There's a phrase that I can't think of what the phrase is now. Is it birds of a feather flock together?
Yes.
So we're more likely to interact with those people that are similar to us. But I think the reason I'm hesitating, I'm just thinking of like the virtual working world and the in-person office working world. I think what's interesting about this generation is for many of them, they've come into the workplace after the pandemic, never having been in that world before. Like, how do you do that thing called office working? They might not have had work experience. So I think that in itself is quite interesting in that I'm seeing a lot of this generation just don't know how to make best use out of working in the office, which means that other people are looking at them thinking, you're not social, you're not doing the sort of collaborative thing, but maybe they don't know how to or haven't been explicitly shown how to. But you are likely to find that generations sit together, go to lunch together, socialise together. And what we're seeing in organisations that seem to be getting this right and embracing it, they're trying to cut through that. Even just the way that people sit or the way that you run meetings, not always having the most senior person run the meeting and really embracing different generations. I think it's an opportunity as well to get more cross-generational working communication and learning going on.
Because it will be sometimes the workplace might be the only place where these generations mix, even if they're still staying a little bit separate organically. But when I think about it, that's one of the reasons why I don't interact with younger people, is that I don't go into a workplace, whereas if I did, I probably would. Very interesting. That was another question I had about the difference between those organizations where a lot of the work is being done in person versus the online ones, and whether there was a difference around that you're seeing or thinking there is. Are you finding anything in the research about that difference?
What we're certainly seeing anecdotally is a lot of the organisations now that are encouraging people back into the workplace. What we're hearing certainly from some of our clients is one of the main reasons we're doing it is for the early careers generation, because they need to be around people to learn. It's a classic phrase, by osmosis, and to see other people is really important. So that seems to be a big driver for quite a few organisations. One of the books that I'll recommend later on, Virtual Natives, talks about it's not quite a generation, but it's a huge pocket of people within that generation that have just embraced virtual living, working, and socialising. And so for them, the idea of being asked to commute into the office just is so alien. Like, why would I do that? It just doesn't seem right. And even actually for some people, being on camera doesn't seem like something they're used to. If they're used to being an avatar, for example, with their friends, it's just a different, quite exposing experience. But I think we've got so much to learn from it. It just, like I think I said to you earlier, the more I look into this, the more questions I have rather than answers.
Yeah, because you're making me think, like, if you think about the people who might be making the decisions or helping to make the decisions of whether more people should come back to the office, for example, we're still there. And then you hear that it's for the young people because they're the ones that are missing out. But then as a young person, maybe you've built your strongest communities online because that, like you said, you were born with a smartphone and you had no one in your neighborhood that looked like you. But actually, if you went online, you found people that looked like you or felt like you or had a similar lifestyle. So I think that there's actually a lot to learn there as well on how to use the online world in very many different ways that usually we would experience them in person. So I hadn't thought of that as well. Yeah, very good. So let's talk about assumptions then. What are the different assumptions? I mean, you've already told us about some of the Generation Z, but what are some of the assumptions that some generations make about each other that are interesting to challenge?
So some of the classics are that the older generations are more resistant to change, they're not comfortable with technology, they're more stuck in their ways, and that the younger generations are really tech savvy and happy about change, but it's not necessarily the case. Another assumption that's made is that the younger generations want more flexible working and are less committed to sticking around in an organisation. But that's not specific to this generation. That's been going on, like the millennials, when they were in their early careers, the turnaround of them sticking with their jobs and moving to new ones was pretty similar to what it is today. And also, if you look at just several different studies around what people want from their work, it doesn't matter what generation you're in. Everyone wants flexibility. Everyone wants to have work that has meaning. I guess just the younger generations now are more vocal about it and more demanding of it. So when you really start to dig deep, actually across the generations, there's probably a lot more that we're similar in than how we're different.
Yeah, I suppose it's what's okay to express. This is a very bad way of putting it, but like you said, they're being more vocal because now it's all right to be saying those things. Whereas maybe 50 years ago, you wanted flexibility, and people would look at you funny.
Yeah.
Do you mean flexibility? You want to touch your toes or what? So yeah, good. I love having, like, we had this with Teresa, when people are in the middle of finding out things because it's like you're finding out things. Some more questions are there. So are there any things that have surprised you? And have you got any questions that you might look at?
Oh, wow.
In the future?
Something that's surprised me, or certainly I just didn't expect this. We've had a few situations where we've been working with organisations where they've said, we've got a challenge in this team because we've got these different generations, and those two people there, for example, or that person there, we're struggling because they're a different generation. But actually, once we got into it and started to delve a bit deeper, it was nothing to do with their generation. Like, so for example, just because somebody's disengaged, it might not be because they're younger than somebody, or if they're spending all of their time on their phone, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're addicted to their phone. It just might be that they've got something going on at home. Or another thing that comes out about the Gen Zers is that they crave feedback and they want it right now, because on social media, you post and you get 16 likes if you're me straight away, or if you're probably a cool Gen Zer, you get 16,000 likes straight away. So they're used to that instant gratification. But again, that's just an assumption that if they want that instant gratification, is it because they're a Gen Zer, or is it because they may be a bit needy or a bit lacking in confidence? So that surprised me about some of the assumptions that I think people they've got good positive intentions, but they've taken them to the wrong place and the wrong conclusions.
I love that. I love that, challenging the assumptions, because of course you're in assuming that you know why something is happening, in this case because of generational stereotypes. You miss out on a lot of asking questions and really finding out what's going on. So it's a great topic to start with, looking at this and finding out. It's quite fun as well, just to take something like age, which I think you say very often is not one of the things we think about immediately when we talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Nice. Good. So we're going to go into the recommendations, but you're still going on with your research, aren't you? And probably by the time this goes out, if anyone maybe is interested or around, you're still looking at your Gen Z research, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. And there's still time, because we're just starting to crunch the numbers. There's still time to take part as well if you're either a manager of a Gen Zer or a Gen Zer. We'd love to hear from you. But we'll be shouting about the results as soon as they come out, because we want everyone to benefit from them.
Excellent. Great. Well, we're going to move on to the recommendations, but listeners, if you want to check out before then what Catherine and the virtual training team are up to, well, go over to thevirtualtrainingteam.com. And I'm just thinking, and we'll put a link to the research so that people can take part. That would be really lovely. Right. Are you ready to go into the recommendations section, Catherine?
I am ready. I'm ready.
Then let's go. Right. So this is, and I always forget to say this, and I forgot about this as well. So this is the kind of audio version of the Virtual Not Distant newsletter. So if you want to sign up to the written version, go over to virtualnotdistant.com/newsletter and you can sign up there. It comes out once a month. And for most of 2024, what I've been doing is bringing in a guest. And so we have this special episode where we tell you our recommendations, and then the written version of the newsletter comes out also written also with recommendations from myself and the guests. So you get hopefully a little bit of a wider and more diverse set of recommendations than if it were just me. So we've got quite a few articles, which is lovely. Let me have a look at what we've got. Let me start with something completely different, Catherine. So these recommendations that we have every month, they are around the world of work, the future of work. There's often quite a lot of, there used to be more around remote. There's definitely things about leadership and management. So this article is called "Should the Daily Stand-Up Die?" and it's on leaddev.com, and it's by Jennifer Riggins. Hello, Jennifer, who is a listener, and she's been on the show as well. And it really is that. It's about the agile stand-up as a practice and whether there's any purpose in doing it like it's always been done. So I don't know if it was a Gen Z that came up with the question, but this is a challenge, and it's a lovely piece. I think, regardless of whether you're into agile or not, it really looks not just at the daily stand-up, but daily meetings or regular meetings that we have for a purpose that actually we could be doing otherwise. Have you found I don't know. Have you found any research which suggests a difference in the view of meetings, or that's way too niche?
Actually, I have. So I've found that with the research around millennials is that they really crave meeting time with their managers. Regular meeting time with their managers. So this is millennials rather than Gen Z, but only 21% of them get regular meetings with their manager, and that can really impact their engagement levels. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, difference.
Yeah. It's interesting around, because part of the daily stand-up is the social aspect of it. Even if you're not talking about the social stuff, if you're remote, you get to see people, don't you? But then there are so many asynchronous ways of doing it in probably more an efficient way. It's balance, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I agree that acknowledging what is really happening and why they are valuable is important, and not assuming that it's because of ABC, but actually something else is going on that might be more valuable. And that might be the reason why we continue doing them or not, or doing differently. Yeah, I agree. Let's have a look. What is something that you've read that you wanted to share with listeners?
Well, that stat that I just shared with you came out of one of my recommendations. That's quite a nice segue. So this is by Dawn Heiberg from an organisation called First Up, but it's a great roundup of statistics about millennials. And the whole conversation about multi-generational working generally focuses in on Gen Z or the polar opposite, and what's happening to our older workers. And the millennials, well, according to research in this article, by the end of next year, will roughly make up like 3/4 of the working population. So we mustn't forget them. And what's lovely about this article, it's just jam-packed full of concluding statistics from organisations like Deloitte and Gartner, and I think McKinsey are in there, and who else? Because I love a stat, don't you? Yes. I love a stat. And there's loads of really interesting stats in there, including as well, quite sadly, that millennials are our least engaged generation right now. Wow. In the workforce. So let's not forget about them. It's not just about Gen Zers. But if you love a stat and you're interested in the millennials, then definitely recommend that one.
Excellent. Wow, I'll go and have a look. So I think I've got another one with, they're not necessarily stats, but there's lots of graphs. So you might like this one.
Love a visual.
And the title is Revealed, the Factors That Influence Employees' Flexible Working Options. And it's from uk.adp.com, which I have to admit I didn't look through to see if it's an organization. But it was shared by somebody on LinkedIn. It was shared by Julie Sheridan. And again, it's about how much flexibility people are happy with, the different levels in different parts of the world, which I found very interesting. Especially, I was a bit surprised, although, of course, they have put Europe in as one big thing. And of course, we know that Europe has a lot of diversity in it anyway. But it looks at age, it looks at industry, it looks at parental status. So again, what is it that influences why people want flexibility and what they want that flexibility for? Which again, talk about assumptions. We always assume it's for the same reasons we do.
Oh, I'll definitely check that out.
Right. What else have we got from you?
Okay, so my next article came out this week, so it's hot off the press. It's Chip Conley, who his background is Airbnb. He's now like an entrepreneur and a speaker, and he's got lots of really big and cool ideas. And this is published by Harvard Business Review. It's called Why Wisdom Work is the New Knowledge Work. I don't want to spoil too much of it because it's not a massively long article. And he says that only 10% of Fortune 1000 companies use age as a diversity metric in evaluating their DE&I initiatives, which is really concerning because age is a protected characteristic, and yet we're not really doing much about it. We're not embracing it in the same way as we are gender and race, which are protected characteristics. But he goes on with loads of really great examples. And one of the things that he recommends is that wisdom is more powerful than just knowledge. So we often talk about, knowledge is power, and then what's the other one, that knowledge work. And he's saying, well, actually, knowledge comes with time, but wisdom can come from all over the place. Experience brings wisdom and perspective brings wisdom. And he talks about this idea called menturn programs. So it comes from the word mentor and intern, and you get two people from different generations together, and they're both mentors to each other, and they're both like interns to each other. So they purposefully get together to learn different skills from each other, perspectives, insights, experiences. And it's a bit different from reverse mentoring. Mm-hmm. It's a word I'd never come across, and I'm like, this is cool, it's funky, let's explore that some more.
I love that idea of the different generations being very aware of how they're different and seeing what they can gain from being with each other, creating with each other, whatever it is. And I think I've seen some some things on LinkedIn with people, especially those that are towards the end of their work life, or actually just in the 60s, and about the difficulties, of course, of finding work when you get to a certain age, when you become older, which I think also comes a lot of the time with the fact that you should also become more expensive because of this wisdom that you have. So in that way, for organizations recruiting, it might be that thing between, well, how much money have we got and who can we afford as well. But I think that this is definitely going to be an issue with retirement ages being later, people wanting to work more, people being more healthy to earn more, and yes, this recognition of what the older people bring to their workplace. I think we've been talking about this for a while, haven't we?
It is interesting though, isn't it? Because the longer people stay at work, and I want the choice, I want to be able to work as long as I can. But I guess the longer that we stay in the workplace, there's less opportunity for people coming into the workplace because it needs to move. And I don't know what the answers are to that. It's a real conundrum, isn't it?
You're right in that it is, you can look at it at the micro level, which is who's the best person for the job and who's going to be valued more and be of more value. But actually, what's happening to society as a whole if we don't do these things? So yeah. Okay, well, answers on a postcard anyway.
Yes, please.
Right. I've got one, it's a shorter piece, but I really liked it. And it's from Johan Lilich, who also was a guest on the show, and who actually, if listeners who are familiar with the concept of visible teamwork, I use this thing he calls DIRECT, which is an acronym for different things that you might want to share in your team. So Johan, he's with me in spirit a lot of my work. And his article was called "What Distributed Teams Can Learn from Open Source Projects." And this was in his own blog. And I've always thought that, well, open source also because they are technology, they're people who work behind computers. And of course, so many of the successful software programs have come from open source projects. And I just think it's a really good reminder that they are distributed by nature and they've been using technology for a very long while to stay connected and build on each other's work. So it's just nice to go back to that every now and then. And Johan's website is called monospacementor.com. We'll stick the link in the show notes. And Catherine, before we, have you got any more articles? I don't think you do.
I've got thousands.
No more that we want to share right now, or else this will be like the bumper edition of recommendations. So I do want to share a newsletter from actually someone who is also a reader of the newsletter. So I'm always so excited when readers email back. And it's a newsletter called All Things Remote, and it's over at allthingsremote.work, and it is by Samantha Jade. And in particular, I've got one of the articles which I'll put in the show notes for you to have a look at. But actually, it's a very different newsletter to this one. She's got lots of very actionable advice, and then she has some reading recommendations. And it's just, I think lots of listeners will be interested in that. So head over to allthingsremote.work. Right, let's go on to the longer reads. Oh, I love books. Catherine, you read a lot, don't you?
I do. I just love a book. I actually fell out of love with books for a couple of years, and I just felt it was such a drain on my time to read a whole book when you could read a synopsis, or often authors will record a podcast or a TED Talk about their book. They'll just listen to that. But then I got back into it and thought, I've missed this so much. You just get so much more richness, and you get the depth of examples and personal experience when you read the actual book. So I'm deeply in love with books again.
I love that you went away and came back. It's always so interesting to what happens in our lives. Do you want to start us off? That would be really good.
Yeah. I had to share Virtual Natives by Catherine Henry and Leslie Shannon, because this is one of the pivotal books that sent me down this rabbit hole that I'm still in around multi-generational working. It's absolutely fascinating. It was recommended to me by somebody with the biggest brain that I know, called Paul Tomlinson. Anything that he recommends, I'm like, I've got to read it. So it's called Virtual Natives rather than Digital Natives. So this is around Generation Z and Gen Alpha, which are the population following Gen Z, who will be work age ready in 2 years. It's those people that have really embraced virtual. And by virtual, that's everything, it's around living and working and socializing and getting your downtime and your entertainment all virtually, whether that's through social media or VR. And it's a huge part of that generation. And they shop virtually and they meet people virtually, and even down to the idea that you don't even need to live with the face that you were given.
Wow. Yes.
You're in a virtual world. You really can have virtual characters. And what I found really interesting as well is that this group, when I say group of people, it's massive. It's almost a whole generation. That they feel it's absolutely fine to change what you look like, change your character depending on where you are, who you're speaking to. And that's really sort of challenged my thinking, because when I'm in VR, I have my avatar and I look exactly the same every time. I wear the same shirt, my hair's the same. I look a lot like me, but like a Disney version. Because I want to stick with, like, I guess, my personal brand, but it challenges the idea that your brand can be different depending on who you're speaking to. But it's pretty terrifying as well as fascinating, I think, that we've got this whole swathe of people across the world that will live their whole lives virtually.
Wow.
It is fascinating. It tells us a lot about that generation as well as just that the idea of, that living virtually.
Yeah, another one for the wish list. At this end. And tell us again, the title
is Virtual Natives.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to that also, because it's a world I know nothing about as well. I've got... I've got 3, and one I really like, and I've recommended this before actually already in the newsletter, but I think it was when I saw you say that you read it and loved it. I think it was you that I went, oh, okay, it's been on my Kindle for a while. And this is Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. And she's turning round, listeners, and she had it there.
It was me.
It was, but really at the top of her small pile of books behind her. She just took it out. I like Adam Grant very much. I haven't finished all of the books of his that I've read, but it reminded me when you said you stopped reading books. I started this book and then halfway through I stopped. I don't know why. And maybe, I don't know, I got stuck. And then I came back to it for this and I thought, and then I finished it. And I love it because it's got some different examples. Like when you read a lot of these books, you end up reading about the same examples. But he has a story of the miners in Chile.
Oh, wow.
That's such a recent event that I hadn't seen anyone analyze it and take organizational lessons from it. And it's also very dear to my heart, has a whole chapter on education and the model in Finland. So it is wonderful, Hidden Potential. So you go back to it often, or it's just there for inspirational osmosis, like I say?
I think the second. But I was similar to you in that I picked it up and then put it down and then picked it back up. And I think it's because it wasn't quite what I was expecting it to be. I thought I wanted the science of, how can I help people and tap their potential? But actually, it's much more of a self-exploration, isn't it, of how you can, work harder and take chances and embrace just different elements of your character. So once I embraced that, I was like lapping up. There's loads of great stories and examples. And the miners in Chile, wow, what an amazing story.
Yeah. And his own story as well is about hidden potential. So that makes it very powerful as well. I really like that. Before we go into one of your books, I'll just, I'm still not sure whether to recommend this one. So this is why I don't want it to be the last one we recommend, because I'm not sure. I don't know. Have you read it? It's called The Expectation Effect by David Robson.
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. So I've had it around for a while, and in essence, it answers the question: how do the body, brain, and culture interact so potently to produce self-fulfilling prophecies? It's basically the expectation effect is that if you expect something to happen, it will happen. So I love it, but I'm about a few chapters in, and it's very heavy on explaining the placebo and the nocebo effect. So it's going into a lot of detail. I don't know where it's going to go. So listeners, if it sounds like something that you might want to read because you're interested in it, and then have a look, The Expectation Effect by David Robson, but I'm not sure now yet. But I do want to bring it to the table. Hello, listeners. Future Pilar here. I have continued to read The Expectation Effect, And I have to say, have a look. If you're really interested in how strong the mind is and the strong effect it can have on the body, on the body's physiology, have a read. I would say that the research is very dense, as in there's a lot of research behind it. So the point is made, and then there's lots of examples. Also, we still don't really know what's going on. So there is that. But it does cover quite a lot of things. I've just finished a chapter on mass hysteria and how suddenly people get very ill in groups and nothing's really wrong with them. I'm now looking at sports and fitness and how important the mind is in that. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, do have a read. Again, it's quite dense, but I think I'm enjoying it a bit more now. And what's the other one that you brought for us?
So the other
Catherine?
one doesn't sound anywhere near as exciting as Virtual Natives, but it's really jam-packed full of great stuff. It's a Harvard Business Review book called Multi-Generational Workplace, of course. And it's classic Harvard Business Review where it's a collection of different articles, but all related to multi-generational working. And you can sort of flick across the topics that you're not interested in and dive into the ones that you are. But there was so much richness that I got out of this. There's things around, for example, talking about menopause at work, and then things around shadow boards. And one thing that I really took away from this is this idea of meta stereotypes. I'd never heard of that term before. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So from a age stereotyping position, and meta stereotype it's like a stereotype that you put on yourself. So here's an example. I might, being somebody that's a Generation X, I might think, oh, all of these younger generations at work assume that I'm not good with change. They'll think that I'll see reasons not to change. I won't be open to new ideas. So if I have that belief about their belief about my stereotype, then that might influence the way that I respond. So I might go over the top at being excited about new ideas to prove that I'm not like the stereotype. So you find that people overcompensate or change their behaviors or get paranoid. And that's what a meta stereotype is. So it's that, I guess it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's maybe driving behaviors that aren't actually that useful because you're making assumptions about the stereotypes that people have of you.
I love that. No, I hadn't come across the term. Wow. And yeah, but well, that might be linked to the expectation effect as well, because it's that kind of, you expect something to happen, you behave a certain way. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so multi-generational workplace. And I'll just end with something I read, which is slightly different and not something that I would often read, but I'm reading a lot about money at the moment and what to do at the, I feel I'm on my way to retirement. I know I'm still, it's still a few years, but my brain is in the money space. And I read The Algebra of Wealth by Scott Galloway, who also wrote, I think it was called The Pandemic Effect, which I really liked. It's actually written for a younger for a younger generation who are getting ready and how to get ready from the beginning of your life for the rest of your life, and around wealth, around money, assets, etc. I really enjoyed it, and it's just he's full of great quotes. Like he has one that says, Sheryl Crow, the singer, once said, "Happiness isn't having what you want; it's wanting what you've got." Yeah, I think it's a real words of wisdom. And the other ones, it said, which I found very interesting, this one, it's completely, it's not about money at all. What's most valuable about advice isn't a recommended course of action, but the questions you get in response, pressure testing your reasoning. And I find this a lot when people try to give me advice. It's my reaction to what they're saying that tells me something about what's going on.
So good. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that is so true.
Yeah, it really touches your buttons and okay. And then my last one, progress isn't linear, it's lumpy.
Oh, I love that.
So again, I think if you're looking for something, it's a little bit, I see Scott Galloway as a kind of philosopher, and then his books are a little bit more practical, and this one is, but I think it's quite an interesting one. Good. So let's move away from reading. Do you listen to many shows?
I do. Yeah, I listen to yours. Yes. I do. And I'm quite choosy because there's we're flooded, aren't we, with with podcasts. If you want me to recommend one, I can.
Recommend some shows, because to be honest, I'm finding it, and I have this, a lot of the other guests have said it's difficult to find specific episodes to recommend, and especially for a podcast now about the world of work, because my own listening is around writing a lot. I'm just listening to that and science. So sometimes it's easier to recommend a show rather than an episode. So while you have a look, I'll start with one of mine, which is a very classic, Ken Blanchard. So Blanchard company has a show that they've had for ages called the Blanchard Leadership Podcast. But there's a specific episode from the 1st of August 2024, which is called Blanchard Leadership Summit Keynote Preview with Jennifer Brown and Marcus Buckingham. And Marcus Buckingham is the writer of, he's done lots of management books, including one which has one of the favorite titles, which is First Break All the Rules. He has a couple of these books which have just these titles that you don't need to read the book to get the message. And he just talks about love and work. And a little bit like the quote from Galloway, he's saying about finding moments of love in your work and how that might help more than finding work that you love.
Oh.
Yes, finding those moments. And also Jennifer Brown, who as a writer, I don't know, she actually talks about being an inclusive leader and recognizing who you might be leaving behind in groups, even when you are championing a cause, or even when you are part of a minority who is not being represented in that minority. It's an interesting episode that I recommend. So 1st of August, Blanchard Leadership Podcast.
Thank you. It's really interesting. Most people don't intentionally exclude people. It's often accidental, isn't it? And I think raising that awareness of just double checking and making sure that, we're completely inclusive is so important. I'll definitely check that one out.
What are some of the shows that you've been listening to?
So I'm going to recommend a couple of podcasts that I can't live without. I listen to yours, this one. So one is called Marketing Against the Grain.
Ah, yes.
Produced by HubSpot, and it's the CMO of the two guys work in the very senior marketing positions. Kip and Kieran, they're called. And even if you're not into marketing, a lot of what they talk about is still really useful. Now, I am very interested in marketing because of my role. And I know that a lot of people that listen to this show are entrepreneurs and self-starters. And so there's lots of ideas there, but they're real tech nerds as well. So I get a lot of my insight into what's happening with AI and automations and just the world in general when it comes to sort of marketing and influence from that show. And it's fast-paced. They have lots of great guests on, and they release that once a week. So that's definitely something that I would recommend.
Excellent. Yeah, I've listened to some. It's episodes. Yeah, I agree. It's nice. Good. Is there anyone?
Yes, another one sort of linked to this. This is called AI Chat, and it's Jaden Schaefer. He's got, I think, 3 podcasts that he does every week. How he finds the time is beyond me. But they're all really short, which suits me very well. So it's very much if there's a new a release or something in the news that's really current about AI or ChatGPT, then it's there in the show, like within hours. So I often, when I'm getting ready in the morning, it's like my news, I guess, is like, what's the latest thing in AI? And it's short, it's sharp. Sometimes it's like 7 minutes, and sometimes there'll be several episodes a week if there's a lot happening in that world. So if you want to keep on top of AI, which is really hard because it's just exploding and so much is happening, he talks about different platforms and use cases and all of that. So that's Jaden Schaefer, AI Chat.
Lovely. Good. I'll just do a quick one from a podcast that I listen to very regularly called Zoe Science and Nutrition. And a lot of people in the UK have heard of Zoe, which is it's a company. They have a whole science-backed product in a way, /service. But I really like this one. It's about the benefits of olive oil. And it was released on the 31st of July, 2024. And it really, I think listening to it just reminded me of, again, talking about assumptions we've made and things we knew were true and things we've grown up hearing that aren't true or that have changed, as in we've discovered that we weren't right. The science is telling us now something different. And so this is a very good episode for that. For the olive oil, they bust a few myths around olive oil. So I recommend it.
So should I be having more olive oil, less olive oil?
Extra virgin.
Extra virgin.
Extra virgin olive oil. And I didn't even realize that there was a date, like a year of when I imagine when the olives had been crushed, and you want to try and not leave it for more than 18 months. So basically, you want the olive to have been made not more than 18 months before you start, that you consume it. Well, kind of. I didn't explain that very well, but yeah, extra virgin olive oil, and you don't want to drink something that has been around for ages, basically.
Okay,
so,
right.
Yeah, it's a good episode.
Check that out. Yeah, I love olive oil.
Yeah, good. So you listen to podcasts, and also what you do create is lots of videos, Catherine, and you do have some that you can recommend. I'm very happy to recommend listeners that watch them. You recently did something on LinkedIn about, again, the generations in the workplace, and actually I did watch some of it, and you shared an anecdote, a personal anecdote, which I think listeners should go and watch. Yes, about you in the workplace as a younger person and how you navigated that. So, which of your videos and pieces shall we recommend listeners to start with if they want to check out some of your work, and specifically on multi-generational?
Well, we've got loads on our YouTube channel, but at the moment I'm recording almost weekly, just really short, like 2-minute pieces around the multi-generational issues and challenges and ideas. So there's about 3, I think, so far, but we're adding to those every week. And then the LinkedIn Live session that you referred to is just half an hour, but it's all about understanding the benefits of the challenges of multi-generational working, but talking specifically to L&D people, like what's a responsibility that you can take to make sure that your organisation are listening to this so that they can benefit from the advantages that embracing a multi-generational workforce brings. So that's definitely worth checking out, and there'll be more coming as well.
Excellent. Well, Catherine, this has been so great. I'm so glad we were able to catch up, and now we've got lots more things to read and listen to, which is fantastic. Listeners, if you want to connect with Catherine, well, do head over to LinkedIn. She's there, Catherine Nicholson. And of course, check out thevirtualtrainingteam.com. Catherine, thank you very much for stopping once again. I think it's like your 3rd time, if not more, on the show.
I've loved it, as I always do. And congratulations on the show, Pilar. It just keeps going and, evolving. And it's always such a pleasure to join you.
Oh, well, thank you for listening as well, then. And listeners, thank you very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. We know there are many other shows for you to choose from. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.